Hello, fellow humans and eavesdropping bots. I'm Chris Nolan.
And I'm Mike Schindler. We are your instructors from Captain Kirk University, where we teach advanced courses in really, truly venturing into the future.
And boldly going into the future. And by future, we mean right now, because AI isn't just knocking on the door, it's kicking it down.
Yeah. So welcome back to the Rise of Humanness Podcast. This is where we explore what it means to stay human in an increasingly uncertain, automated world.
Right. And before we get going, be sure to hit the subscriber button and share this podcast with a friend, a stranger. We don't care. We're not picky.
And together, we're going to show you how to stay absolutely powerful,
Stay human.
and rise and thrive in the age of AI.
Yes. And even show you how to beat the bots. Well, let's rise.
The rise of humanness in the age of AI. It's a podcast with Chris and Mike. The rise of humanness in the age of AI. Stay curious, stay human, let's rise.
Yeah, so we're gonna really be your guides today, and we're gonna explore what it means to be indispensably human in this AI-powered world. So today we're diving deep into what it means to be human-centered AI.
Our guest today is a powerhouse in the world of AI and human-computer interaction. James Landay is a professor of computer science, co-director of Stanford's Institute of Human-Centered AI, HAI, and a leading voice in the rise of humanness in the machine age. He's dedicated his career to shaping AI and making sure it doesn't turn into HAL 9000.
Oh, I love that. Well, Professor, welcome to the show. We're glad you're here. Let's talk about AI. Let's talk about humans. Let's talk about humanity versus the machines and who really is in charge. So welcome to the show.
Welcome,
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, let's dive right in here. So, James, Mike and I are huge fans of you and Stanford HAI, you, the pioneers in this human-centered AI area. We love Dr. Fei and John Etchemendy, and we're talking to them too. But let's start with your journey. What sparked your passion for human-centered AI? Did you watch too many Matrix movies? Or, to unpack what human-centered AI means and why it's so crucial.
Yeah. So, I'm like probably any technologist. I've seen the movies, but I was not necessarily a kind of AI head type of person who was building that. In fact, my career has been more in what we call human computer interaction. So how do we build the interfaces that people use in computers to make it better for people, to make it easier to use or allow you to do something more powerfully that you want? And, that history really came out of growing up. I grew up down there in LA and Hollywood, where all the movies were being made. But my dad was a lawyer. He worked at home and he was trying to use computers in the 80s, and it was hard to use. And I was always trying to help him fix it. So I got really motivated on how can we design this stuff? And then eventually the research area of this is what will it be like in the future? So you're not just thinking about how do I, fix the next version of the Mac operating system that's coming out, but how are we going to change fundamentally how we use computing in the future? And so from my PhD at Carnegie Mellon back in the early 90s, all the way to being a professor here at Stanford, much of my work has involved AI being the ingredient under the hood that it was allowing these new ways of using computing in a positive way for people. So I've been using AI in that vision the whole way, but I wouldn't say I was like the people who are out there, coming up with the new AI algorithms. And so, when we saw AI really starting to take off, which really was the deep learning revolution in 2014, that Fei's work really with the ImageNet challenge kind of was the starting gun that kicked this off, because when a deep learning algorithm won that challenge, I think in the 4th or 5th year of it in 2014.
Is that the Go model thing you're talking about?
It was simply being able to look at images with an algorithm and then predict what's in the image. Well, Fei created this millions of images data set called ImageNet. And the ImageNet challenge is essentially a challenge where a bunch of algorithms compete, given images to say what the image is, and the algorithm that gets the highest percentage wins. So in that year, that was the first time a deep learning algorithm won this challenge versus more custom algorithms that knew how to do things specifically with images in the ways that computer vision had been working for 40 years. And that set off a race. All of the research, all of these big companies, Google, Microsoft, eventually OpenAI, started really looking into neural networks and deep neural networks as a way to solve AI. And by 2016, only 2 years later, 2017, we saw that these algorithms were starting to go into products from companies that like Google, Facebook, Apple. You started to see your voice being recognized better in about 2017, 2018.
Alexa today now.
Yeah, on your phones. They had that before, but it didn't work as well. That's when they switched it to deep learning. And we also saw, especially Feifei, because she was working on leave at Google in their cloud division, that a lot of companies that you don't think of as tech companies, insurance companies, finance companies, they were all starting to use this in their products. And so we realized this technology is going to be in everything in our lives, and it's coming soon. And we needed to see how might we shape this in a way that's positive for society rather than just let tech companies that are mainly driven by, short-term profit motive and don't have that product expertise, mainly just have engineers and business people. How do we start to shape the conversation around it, as well as shape the design of it, shape the evaluation of it, shape the policy to have positive impact on humanity? So that's kind of where my background kind of fed into the Institute being founded.
Are you like Feifei? Are you in the image area too?
So Feifei is in the computer vision area. And the other co-founder was Chris Manning, who's one of the top people in the world in what we call natural language processing. So, how to parse human words. So if you think of these large language models, that NLP or natural language processing is where they've had an impact. And he was one of the first people to start using these deep learning methods for natural language processing. So it was those two as the technical AI people. And then there was me more from the interface, human-centered side. So if there's reason that human-centered's stuck on the front of that name, it was me holding on to that title way really tight. Like, no, we're not changing it.
Yeah.
This is what we need to be about. And I think we've changed the conversation. So we have made an impact in the world. A lot of other places look to us and say, oh, we want to do it like human-centered AI. Companies want to be part of our institute as members because they want to learn how to be human-centered and how to do responsible AI. So that term, I think, has served us well and has been kind of a calling card for people who want to do AI beyond just the technology itself.
That's really good. I want to go deeper on that, because when you say human-centered, like user-centered design, that's not enough, but that's kind of been your background. And now we talk about community-centered design and something bigger, even a bigger perspective around that. So are people just putting human-centered, or are they like slapping the sticker on AI and saying, hey, this is human-centered? I mean, in that AGI is kind of in this race toward warp speed. I mean, what do you mean by truly keeping it human-centered?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because I think people are just slapping that label on. And I would almost accuse us of originally just slapping that label on. And originally I thought that was okay. It actually meant different things to different people.
Exactly.
But as somebody like me who comes from that user-centered design world, it meant, hey, we got to figure out the right process with the right people and how to design this. To somebody who came from a technical background, like these AI specialists, to them, it was more of, okay, we did it on a topic that is very human-centered, like health or education. And then to somebody coming from the social sciences and humanities, it might have meant, oh, well, we're involving ethics and thinking about humanity. And at first I thought that was okay. It was kind of like, hey, we have a big tent and we let people kind of bring their own meaning to it. But after a couple of years of this, I realized it doesn't have the power if we don't really know kind of what it means and how that should change how you would develop this technology, because it's just too nebulous. So that's when I started to really try to define better what did it mean by human-centered? And then could I turn it into almost a process that I could teach, whether it's students here at Stanford or designers and engineers out in the real world, teach a process that if they followed, they were more likely to get technology that was better and worked better and had more positive impact. And so to me, that's what human-centered is. It is about who it is we involve in the design process. And yes, embracing user-centered design, which I've been in that field for 30 years, but going beyond it to community-centered, because AI systems impact people beyond your direct user, which is the big difference. So we need to go to the broader community and involve them in that. And then if your AI system's really successful, think about the Facebook newsfeed, which is really driven by AI. You can have societal impacts, positive and negative. So you need to even start thinking about societal centered design and what might you do? So to me, human-centered AI is working at design across those levels, integrating them. And then it's also about who's on your team, because guess what? Technologists, they're not trained to even have the tools to think at the community-centered or at the society-centered. So we got to involve the social scientists, the humanists, the artists who have that different way of thinking in these design processes as well. And that's what is human-centered AI to me.
Well, I think maybe you should come up with a sticker or something, because, when you dig into it further, as AI is creeping into everything, work, especially in the workplace. Here's an example. I mean, there's a video now on Instagram, I think, of Amazon and Starbucks using AI to spy on their workers so that they time everything down to the second, So if that's the case, I mean, what is the future of work? How is it really human-centered,
Right. And that's not human-centered, right? That's surveillance state, right? And I have a project that is kind of similar in that we're using AI to understand what's happening in a home as an elder is aging in place and allow them to live in their own home longer. But you have sensors and cameras in a home, then you start to go, well, how does that turn into a surveillance state? And if I have care workers who come into homes, which a lot of our elders have, if they're in the same place, how do we turn it into we're helping that care worker do a better job rather than we're just surveilling them to say, did they do this? Did they do that? Did they do it in the right order? So there's the fine line. And part of this is, again, if you involve those people in that design process and even people peripheral to it, you're more likely to do something that's going to be positive for them rather than the more narrow, hey, it just made more money for the company who's installing this, but it, caused the humanness of the workers to go down. So, again, this process would change that. I don't think those companies that are doing the surveillance that you're talking about would come up with the same solution if they were looking at these other levels rather than the immediate level of maybe productivity of the worker.
Yeah, that's what that video showed, Chris, right? I mean, it showed that, one barista was making like 20 cups and the other one was making 3. And, they had a performance improvement plan if, you were following, or a termination notice, right? Which I think
that was scary. Or Big Brother going, make it faster.
Yeah, exactly.
So
this is interesting to me because Microsoft recently came out with a study that said critical thinking's taken a nosedive, right? Because people are, using AI, ChatGPT. So, in a few years, we're going to have AI that has 1,000 IQ. We can't remember email passwords. I mean, where does this, in your opinion, Professor, where does this leave the human?
Well, when we founded the Institute, we had 3 principles that guided it. One was, first, understanding that this technology does have and will have a large impact. And so we need to understand the ethics and the way of designing it from this before you build something, along the way and after, because the potential for both good and harm is large. So one was, making sure that we understand it from that human aspect. Another principle for us was, although the technology has been increasing a lot with this deep learning, we actually don't think that's the be all end all of intelligent machines. And we actually think, guess what? The human brain is still the most complex device in the known universe, and we still don't fully understand it. And better than this AI in a lot of ways. For one, you hear about all the power that's used to train these models and to run it. Human brain takes 20 watts. So, it's like a dim light bulb. Okay. These other things
are much I'm going to say about that right now.
Yeah. These other things are gigawatts. How do we learn from why it's so efficient? And it's also efficient in the amount of learning, the amount of data that you need to give these large models for it to learn to be even at human level. The level is like millions or trillions of times more data than what you expose a child to during their development. So there's a lot in here that we don't understand that could make a lot better AI. So we also believe we need to fund research in neuroscience and behavioral science to think about better ways to do it. But the last one that's most relevant, I think, to your question is, although this technology is going to disrupt the workplace, the future of work, it will. Be skeptical of economists who can tell you which job or not, because 5 years ago, all they would say was, oh yeah, all the drivers are gone in 5 years. And that's still not happened, though it's getting better and better. Now it's all, the call center workers or the professors, I don't know, information workers. It's hard to predict these things, but there will be disruption. But what we need to think about is not just using AI as a replacement or AI to just say, hey, go faster. It's how do we take humans and things they're good at and AI and things it's good at and build systems where the AI is augmenting the person to do the thing better and even be more enjoyable. Like every one of us has something in our jobs that's scut work that we hate. Well, I want AI to you take care of all my trip receipts and reimbursements and answering a bunch of email that I have to do, but is just not core to my job. But then there's things that are core about how I work with my students and how I teach them and how I have empathy for struggles they're going through. Like those are things that a machine's not going to be as good at. And even if it pretends to be good at, humans may never accept it as appropriate. So figuring out a way to design where we're augmenting humans rather than replacing them is part of our core mission and figuring that out. And I think that human-centered AI process is part of getting there so that we're front and center thinking how to augment people instead of replace them.
Yeah. Well, along the lines of making this happen, okay, you talked about the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration on AI. So where is that? I mean, how can researchers in computer science and designers and social scientists all work together to get these challenges figured out? How do you envision, where is this central committee that works like AI Avengers?
So it's a couple different places. So one, in the university, we have this incredible benefit. If this technology is going to affect all of society, we need all the voices that understand the different pieces of society at play in this conversation. Well, guess what? Where is that? Universities, we actually have, at least in the strong liberal arts universities, this breadth.
Yeah.
But a place like Stanford, we have, some of the top AI scientists in the world. Stanford AI Lab's been around since the early 60s. In fact, John McCarthy, who founded it, is one of the 2 people or 3 people who actually came up with the term artificial intelligence in the late 1950s, right?
Yeah.
We have the technologists and engineers, but guess what? We also have one of the top medical schools in the United States, one of the top law schools, one of the top business schools, and top social scientists, economists, humanists, and even artists here. So we have in a university like this, all of that breadth. They need to come into play. And so in our institute, we actually engage all these fields. Now, if we now go to so we can really reflect on how to do these things using all that. Now, in the private industry, a lot of companies, especially in tech, mainly have engineers, have some designers, and they have people with business backgrounds. Okay. Now, some of these big companies have been hiring social scientists and humanists, but they've been using them in a way that has been shown not to be effective. So often they've put them in these separate groups doing things like sometimes called trust and safety. And as a product's almost ready to go, before you can release it, you got to like find out that the trust and safety people give you the thumbs up. Thinking launching the space shuttle. Are we going to be safe or are we going to blow this thing up? And unfortunately, by that point, even if these people say, oh, well, it's going to have all these problems, the money's on the table at this point.
Of course.
It's almost always like, launch it. We'll fix it after the fact.
Thank you for weighing in, Professor.
Yeah. And so we've seen this go bad. We've seen it go bad at Google, but we've really seen it go bad at Facebook. You might think, they just didn't know better. No, not true. They have some of the best social scientists, or what we call computational social scientists, in the world. And they were in kind of these separate organizations, but by the time their voices came in, and ethicists, it's too late. So what has to happen is those people need, one, they probably need more, but they need to be spread out down at the bottom in the actual teams that are building these things. And a lot of the problems would never even get to that level because a lot of the issues would be worked out in the teams where you have social capital with your teammates. You're part of that team. It totally changes the conversation. And also just having those diverse points of view, whether it's diverse by field or diverse just by life experience, also will lead to kind of better innovation that has less chance of stepping into these potholes. Like these companies, a bunch of them released famously computer vision that could do face detection and say, oh, that's, Mike and that's Chris. And guess what? It worked well for white people, but for people of color, the numbers were really bad. And for Black women, the numbers were horrible. And a few of the companies kind of fought those results when independent researchers showed it, like Amazon fought it like night and day. On the other hand, companies like IBM and Microsoft are like, oh, that's bad. We'll fix it. And they fixed it. And it wasn't rocket science. But I would claim that if those people had more diverse teams on those teams in the first place, that never even would have happened. They would have seen it and they would have fixed it and they would have released those products without kind of the damage that was done. So we've seen that kind of fail repeatedly. And part of it is not having the right breadth and not having that breadth and diversity down at the bottom level teams. So what's that going to mean? It means hiring more of these people. It's going to cost, but it's going to save you a lot in reputation. Like you don't want to be on the front page of the New York Times saying, hey, our computer vision out of this company XYZ seemed great, but for Black people, it doesn't work. Like nobody wants that bad story. You may have saw the story. Air Canada got sued by a person where their chatbot gave bad information about a bereavement fare. And instead of giving this guy $1,000, they went to small claims court and they lost and ended up being on the front page of the business section of like 40 papers in all over the world. Like they probably lost tens of millions in marketing on this, right? You don't want that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so interesting to me because it seems, as you were talking, I was thinking, why aren't we testing these products earlier? To your point, I remember back in the day when I lived in Seattle, Microsoft would bring me in and we'd do those user interface studies. They'd pull me into this little lab. I'd be in this little closet. And they'd throw the product in front of me and say, and sometimes I'd look at the product and go, I'm stuck. And they're like, you don't know how to get off the screen? I'm like, I have no idea how to get off the screen.
That was early Microsoft.
Yeah, that was early Microsoft.
Before they got Apple stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so interesting to me that, as we're building this technology, which is supposed to drive the humanness for us, are we testing this at like the base level, James? I mean, are we, pulling in the construction worker and say, are we doing that?
I would say yes and no. Well, yes, they still do. This is user-centered design that you're talking about, usability testing. They still do this stuff. Google does it. Microsoft does it. Apple pretends they don't do it, but they do it because they want you to just think great design just comes out of the head of, John and Ive previously and whoever it is now. But they do this stuff. They just do it more secretly. These companies do this testing. But there is two factors that I think are affecting it. One is the speed of this market.
Yeah.
Wanting to be, they've seen each of these last technology revolutions where, hey, the winner was the one who grabbed that market share and just became one of the next leaders. So look how, Google and Amazon are left standing out of that big bubble of companies, from the early and late 90s, and Uber and Lyft, now this next set of trends of mobile companies, right? So there was this trend of, hey, the ones who grab a lot of market early, maybe the big one who holds on for the next generation. And, with OpenAI out there in front on this, these other companies are probably cutting some corners that they wouldn't have cut before just to make sure they're in the game. That's one piece. Another piece is the dominance and prominence of the AI machine learning engineers in this new wave are people who are used to just saying, hey, we have a data set. We run our algorithms against the data set and we get these numbers and it says it's good. Ship it, right? You see all these benchmarks that come out on it's on this benchmark. But guess what? Their benchmarks don't include some of these questions that you're asking about. Like, would it work with different minorities and would it work with that construction worker? Their benchmarks are much more narrow and technology focused because that's what these people were trained on. Their PhDs and in their engineering careers, they weren't trained on how do I make it work for different people? That's not their field. And their prominence is kind of elbowed out a little bit of that other stuff. And the speed they're being forced to move at elbows it out a little. So I think those things are happening. And then these structural things, they've had those trust and safety teams, not for AI. They had them originally for privacy and security issues. And it seemed to work okay for some of that stuff. That people were like, oh yeah, there's a security hole here. We got to fix it. Because they were more kind of specific problems that one could just attack. And I think they tried to use that same structure and it doesn't seem to work as well for some of these AI problems. And so these are a variety of different reasons as to why I think it has not gone as well so far with AI. Now, some of this might slow down. Maybe we're starting to asymptote. Some of these companies want you to think it's a curve going like this exponentially, and it's going to be, like you said, 1,000 IQ soon.
Yeah.
Others of us think maybe it's actually a curve going like this, and it's going to asymptote because used all the training data in the world that's easy to get at or cheaply to get at or easy for them to steal, since a lot of them probably clearly stole it. And that it's not, without radical new ideas, it's going to slow down. And as things slow down, it might be easier to kind of deal with problems. But when it's moving at what we call AI time, AI time is like 1 week, 1 month is like a year in normal time.
Yeah.
Pretty hard to keep up.
Well, if it gets, it is right now, we're going to have synthetic, knowledge. It's going to have to iterate on itself because, like you said, we've used most of the knowledge on the planet. But let me do the flip side of human-centered AI, which Mike and I deal with, and we've talked to a lot of folks about. So, and this has to do with your interdisciplinary collaboration. So, do you think as AI gets, let's just say it'll double in intelligence to 200, maybe it won't get to 1,600 right around the corner, but as it gets more and more intelligent and it's the smartest thing in the room, do you think that there's any interdisciplinary collaboration going on between psychologists, neurologists, AI human research teams, human behavior experts to create something for people to go, oh, this is how I can get better in the age of AI. We call it the rise of humanness, how it can expand and evolve and, elevate their mindsets, their skill sets.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure some of that's going on. I can't cite an exact project where I know it exactly. Because I think one issue I see is there's limited imagination in what form these AI systems are going to take. Like a lot of people are just like, oh, it's just like ChatGPT. I type at a thing or I speak at a thing and it tells me stuff. To me, that's a small step on the evolutionary scale of what this is going to be. I actually think we're going to interact with these things much more like we would a person, which means what I'll call multimodally. Like I'm going to be able to point at like, hey, that book and that book, what's common about them? Or, hey, what was the pizza I ordered last week? Oh, you give me 5 of those. Like the way we interact with people uses our facial expression, our body expressions, maybe even pheromones and gesture, and the way we're going to, and I might point and use my computer at the same time. This is what I call multimodal. We're going to interact with these agents in much richer ways than is imagined by this typing into a window or speaking into a window. And that might also change how you might think about working with AI more as an intelligent assistant that actually understands you. Like maybe in the next room, I don't know if you have some great assistant there who just knows what Chris is working on, anticipates what you're needing, but gets it wrong every now and then, and you can correct it, and then it learns very quickly. I think we're going to be getting these AI assistants that are more like that. And that's not far off. And not think of it almost as this separate thing that has a glass between it that we just talk through a keyboard to get at. And I think that's going to change how you might interact and believe it in some good ways, but maybe also in bad ways. So think of, the movie Her, kind of, am I going to have a relationship? That movie, which I'll give full disclosure, my brother was the producer of, it's about relationships. It's not really about AI, but, are we going to have relationships? I mean, we already see some people doing this with these agents. And to me, that's sort of scary. I could see some positives, but also a lot of negatives if that's your only interaction is with an artificial being rather than real people out in the real world. If we're worried about like kids and people with too much screen time and not interact in the real world, it's only going to get worse with some of this stuff, right? So how do we design to not have that happen, right? That's a problem.
Yeah.
I think that's just so fascinating. Chris and I talk about that movie all the time, James. We talk about Her and we see what's happening in Japan with the young men and, their artificial intelligence and the relationships that they're creating and even what's going on in relationships.
Human robots, yeah.
I as you're talking, all I can think about is Star Trek or you know what I'm saying? Like he's talking and, in Star Trek, they were, I don't know, intuitive. Maybe they were so future back thinking.
He talks about intuitive design a lot.
I know. I mean, this is where I think that, if we just went back and watched the 1966 TV show, we could learn a lot about what's going on with AI. So scaling on the human-centered AI piece, I think this sounds absolutely amazing to me. And I know to Chris as well, but how do we actually do it? I mean, I think we talk about it, but what methodologies are we exploring to keep AI ethical and unbiased and actually prioritize humans as
yeah. So to me, this is a problem where there's no single silver bullet solves it by itself. Like many complex problems, there's no silver bullet. So to me, there's 3 main approaches and they don't cover it all, but they do well. So one is ethics. Okay. How do we train the people who are building these things to be more ethical in how they'll do things? So for example, at Stanford, we probably for 30 years have had a capstone ethics course that was a requirement of our computer science majors. Well, it's not clear that had a big effect because a lot of these people working in these companies doing some of these bad things probably were our students, okay, and probably took that class. And I think a lot of them, that was like a checkoff class, like, hey, I took it, check. So we've done a program we call embedded ethics, which we unabashedly copied from our friends at Harvard, but have scaled up in a major way. We have over 20 courses in our computer science major where we have ethics lessons embedded in the other course that you're normally taking. So you're taking natural language processing. Somewhere in that course, you might learn about what are the ethics about paying people in other parts of the world to label training data and what could the impact be on their own mental health, showing them, let's say pornographic images that you're trying to keep off. Right. So we've done this different way of looking at ethics education because we think maybe that kind of education will stick more, kind of doing it in context of what you're learning.
Like real time.
Yeah. So that's one.
Yeah.
But we've also seen, like I've tried to say that we need a different way of the design process and where we think about design and who we're designing with, both who we bring into the process, community, society, the techniques we might use, and then who's on that team. So that would be human-centered design and a process is what I say is the second one. And then the third one is, well, there are going to be people who even with A and even with B still do bad things, either because, hey, it's just about the money. And, like the guy who took all of our images off of Facebook to make a database, Clearview AI, so that police and intelligence services all over the world could identify you without your permission. Maybe people like that are still going to do it for the money, or some company where they just didn't take care. Even though they knew they should, they didn't put enough effort. And that's where law, regulation, policy comes into play to try to make the cost of having screwed that up be high enough such that you'll want to take care or you'll want to make sure you did it right. So we need all three of those, I think. I think even with all three, we don't fix everything. We don't catch everything. Still, things will fall through, but that happens already.
Yeah.
We already have bad lawyers. We have bad doctors. We have bad car companies where bad things happen. And we have legal, civil, and other ways of trying to correct. Sometimes we change the law. Sometimes we change the regulations. Sometimes it's just you got fined a lot of money, and sometimes you go to jail.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be all of those things are going to help us. And there will still be some bad things. And hopefully they're not so bad that like the world ends. They're bad such that, there's some harm done and you pay a price for it so you don't do it again. Right. I think that's the likely future we're looking at. Now, there's also technical solutions. There's a lot of people working. How do I make the model be less biased and have less harm? Those things are good too, but they won't catch it all either. So we need all of these things together. It's kind of like a wicked problem, like global warming. There's not one solution that's going to fix that thing. There's got to be like 50 different things happening that won't get us there. And it's kind of like that kind of scale.
But yeah, but a lot of it's like self-regulatory now, so it's like difficult to, kind of that's where climate change has gone to now too.
Well, in the United States, it's not likely we're going to pass much regulation on much of anything.
Yeah. All right.
And policy, not much of anything, unless it has to do with military competition with China. That's probably about the only thing the U.S. Congress is going to agree on doing something about. But there are other countries that will probably have laws and regulations like Europe. And at least our big companies will need to comply with that if they wish to be in these global markets. And it is kind of AI is a global technology, right? You're not going to want to sell it in the US. You're going to want to sell it everywhere. And that means you're going to be limited by global regulation. So there will be some regulation, but what it is, I'd also say it's early days. Even though these companies want you to think AGI is next week. And if my company doesn't turn on a dime and go all in on AI, we're dead in a year. I don't think that's true. It is faster for certain industries like tech than it is for others. I think we're more on the 5 to 15 year large transformation of our company, of our economy, our country, our society. And that still says we have time to kind of try to figure out how to do it right. It is imminent and it's urgent, but it's not tomorrow is what
Don't you think people are like, though, they want to put that flag in the sand and say, we did it. We did AGI, right? Even maybe it isn't quite AGI, but.
Well, I think they either want to say we did it or they want to say we're going to be the one to do it. It's coming soon. But most people who tell you that, I want to ask you, well, what's their motivation? And again, as when my kids were young and they said, why are people doing this? This makes no sense. It's wrong, whatever. It's usually about the money. And in many cases, those people are selling you something, whether it's selling you to pump up the valuation of their company so that they can raise more money in their next fundraising round, or it's just to pump up the valuation so that they can sell stock that makes them rich. You got to be careful when people have a lot of money on the line. Is that part of the motivation for telling you a story that might be science fiction?
Yeah, it's marketing. Right.
Well, it's probably usually somewhere in the middle. There's some of both. Some is true belief, but some is also selling you something, right? And you gotta have some skepticism and look for a variety of experts to really decide what's occurring.
Speaking of science fiction, Captain Kirk, he bucked the system half the time, right? I mean, he had the Captain Kirk hunch, right? Spock would be saying something, the computer would be saying something. He'd kind of do that. So do you see AI kind of empowering human intuition, or do you think it's just going to totally replace it?
I mean, that's super interesting is, again, what is it that we're good at and what are machines good at?
Mm-hmm.
Right. The AI that we're looking at today, people either don't understand or forget. It's simply predicting what's the next word, given I've seen a bunch of training data, right? And that's not the same as what humans are doing with intuition or other things. Now, underlying our system, maybe there's some similarity, but I think it's very different at this point. And so should be thinking about, again, what are humans good at? I think we're good at, for example, understanding other people and their emotion and empathy and how we connect to society. We evolved as social animals. These machines are not really trained on that. They're just trained on words. Now, we're going to eventually be sending a lot more signals to them that they'll train on, but that's not what any of this AI is today. It's mainly language. Some people are doing images and videos so that they can generate video, but it's missing a huge amount of what you observed and learned as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, those dates that went bad, those friends that you had to fight with, the wife that you had an argument with, and that you hopefully learned from as you went, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of the skills in that I think we still have that machines don't have. And we need to figure out kind of what are they good at? What are we good at? And how do I put those two together to be better? So for example, a lot of people thought, well, we're creative. Machines won't be creative. Well, we can make them creative. They don't seem to have great taste though. So I can have an idea and say, hey, give me different versions of this song. They don't seem to be very good at telling you what's the good version, but you have a sense. And, I see your awards back there. You probably have a sense of, hey, this clicks, this works.
I don't know what taste is.
Yeah. Yeah. But sometimes you have a vision of like, this is good. It's an art, and so an artist has a sense of whether it's doing what they're trying to achieve. And they're wrong sometimes, obviously. We have flops, right? But then we have hits. But there's something there that I think is still human about feeling, intuition, gut. Like, what's this thing? Trust your gut. Like, that means there's something that we have a hard time articulating in words of why something's right or wrong. Well, these machines, they're purely on words. They don't have gut. They're going by what are the probabilities of these words. So there are differences, and they will remain unless these large models become totally different architectures than they are today. And I think these differences will remain, and we got to figure out what they're good for. Like if I write a paper saying, oh, make a short version so I can send it to Chris Nolan because he doesn't want to read 10 pages of this. He wants to read a page. They're really good at that. Or I got writer's block and I can just think of the outline. Give me a first draft. They're really good at that, though. It's mediocre. It's not great, but now I can go from that and really start to get writing better, right? So, I think we need to be careful to just think again. It's this curve like this that they're going to just exponentially get better and better and better, and then just do everything we can do and replace us. We'll replace some things. And I think we should be worried about job loss. Because if we have what happened with globalization, which took 35 years, and it happens in only 10 to 15 years, that's going to be harder for us to deal with, right? Globalization, you might say, hey, our GDP kept going up the whole time, so wasn't that good? Tell that to the guy who lost his steel plant job in Pittsburgh or his car plant job in Detroit or Cleveland and couldn't afford his kids going to college, and the last 30 years of his life were not what he had expected previously. It's uneven, the winners and the losers. If that same thing happens again, but in a more compressed time, it's much harder for us as a society to adapt. And that's what I'd be worried about, because there will be this. Some jobs are going to be replaced. Other hand, some jobs are going to be new. And then some jobs are going to be enhanced. Like my job's much better now because I got rid of that scut work that I didn't like doing anyways. Right. And how to know how much is in each of those, we just can't know.
Yeah, that's really good.
Well,
Chris, why don't you take the last question?
I'll do kind of a sum up in a way. Well, one of the things that you very well articulated, by the way, about the other side of this human-centric story, it's interesting. Mike and I talk about the narrative that's out there. So one of the narratives, and I guess I'll kind of roll this into a question, is what we just talked about. There are actually 10 types of intuition, right? And AI has kind of one of them. There are 10 types of knowledge. AI is deductive, probabilistic, you know that. But there's 9 types that humans have. Do you think with the human-centered AI that there's enough discussion about this other side of it? What is human-centered? What does it mean to be human? In that discussion, because I think if you solve that story, a lot of people would have less fear.
So I think there is not enough of that. I mean, I do think that's something we talk about, especially my friends who are from the humanities. So my friend Guo Wang, who's a professor of music, who also has a PhD in computer science, he gives this great talk on, what is it that we want from AI and what does it mean to be human in some way? So that discussion does occur. I think it doesn't occur enough. And I definitely think it doesn't occur in these tech circles, which really are echo chambers of these almost people with this religion of AGI or super intelligence. And they're really just kind of living some kind of sci-fi dream, not thinking the breadth of a Renaissance person, of a social science humanist artist. And I really think these other ways of thinking are what allow us to ask, what does it mean to be human? I mean, I have a PhD student who's looking at what are the cultural values that are embedded in these large malls because of the languages that they were trained on, and almost the ontology that's built in the philosophy sense of what does it mean to be? What is a human? Is it a biological species or is it symbiotic? Like there's lots of different ontologies, but it's a purely Western ontology that's built into these systems because of the training data. That might not be appropriate for different cultures in different places in the world. But we need people who ask those kind of questions to be part of the conversation, to be able to nudge the way this technology is being built, to actually ask questions about what does it mean to be human, what's different, and how should these things interact with it and shape it and help it. And I think those questions aren't being asked enough, but I do think this fear that you notice among society, that fear is also in the fear of the humanists, the social scientists, the lawyers. And so AI is infusing all of these fields as those people start to think, hey, what does this mean for me? So I'm pessimistic a little with the technocentric view that is dominating industry and even dominates our government's policy in some ways. But I'm also optimistic that everyone's waking up and we will hear more of these voices. I think that can help us positively shape the technology. And I think we need to.
That is so good. I think that's this has been absolutely mind blowing. I mean, when you think about it, like, how do we get to the human thing? Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you really on bringing to the audience, to the world, this need to have this AI human-centered type of conversation. I think that's really important moving forward.
Right. I love this. Thank you, James. Great conversation. I guess we'll wrap it up, Mike, right? I mean, we now know that it's not going to be human-centered and not dystopia. So we can move on. So I think we'll just say, don't forget to subscribe, share, let us know in the comments what excites you most about the human-centered world, about the new AI future. And remember, the future waits for no one, but it does send reminders like this podcast.
That's right. So until next time, as we say, stay adaptable and
stay human. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
The rise of humanness in the age of AI. It's a podcast with Chris and Mike. The rise of humanness in the age of AI. Stay curious, stay human, let's rise.